Good evening, everyone. My name is John, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Kanien'kehá, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Brewstertown. We are gathered here today to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of When the Pine Needles Fall, Indigenous Acts of Resistance by Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel and Sean Carleton. It is my pleasure and true privilege to be standing here before you to offer some opening comments. Rest assured, I won't be very long. And I'm particularly grateful to Between the Lines for publishing this book and for teaming up with the Center for Human Rights Research and the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba to make this evening a reality. There'll be a conversation that'll take place to my left, and that'll be followed by an opportunity for you gathered here to ask questions. So please do allow those to percolate over the course of the evening. And when it comes to the Q&A time, if you do have a question, just put up your hand. I'll walk over to you with this handheld microphone to ensure the question may be heard on the live feed, and we'll take things from there. If you are one of those people watching virtually and do have a question, please feel free to write it in the chat, and we will put them to our panelists as time permits. Following that, there'll be signing, which will take place at the table to my right, and I'll have thrilling notes about signing procedure for you at the close of the event. So just before I get into introducing my guest, or our guest this evening, I will apologize in advance, as always, for my clumsy settler tongue, and thank you very much for your accommodation. Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel is a Kanien'kehá Turtle Clan artist, documentarian, and Indigenous human rights and environmental rights activist living in Kanehsatà, Kanien'kehá, homelands. That is, in addition to serving as a spokesperson for her community during Canada's violent siege in 1990, and her work since then as an Indigenous land defender and feminist leader. We could speak for the rest of the hour about all the accomplishments of our special guest this evening, and I hope that will be part of the conversation. But I'll also turn to our co-author, Sean Carleton, who is a settler historian and professor of history and Indigenous studies at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1. He is also most recently the author of Lessons in Legitimacy, Colonialism, Capitalism, and the Rise of State Schooling in British Columbia, published by UBC Press. Host Kiera Ladner is the Canada Research Chair in Neo-Wet'suwet'en, Indigenous Governance and Digital Sovereignties, and a distinguished professor of Indigenous Politics and Canadian Politics at the University of Manitoba. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our illustrious panel.
I just want to say what a pleasure it is and what an honor it is to be here with Ellen and Sean. This book it's such an honor to have read it. It's all of you have something to really look forward to. And it's so awesome to sit in this chair and interview you, because last time I saw Ellen, she was interviewing me. So maybe there's some never go back. It's such an honor, Ellen and Sean. I've read it. I'd like to give Ellen a few minutes to talk about the way in which the book starts, which is the words that come before all else. Do you have some comments, some ideas as to why you started that way? It is the best words those good words to start with. I know, can you talk a bit about why you started that way?
Sure. With Kanehsatà Katsi'tsakwas Ellen Gabriel, Kanehsatà, with Kanehsatà Taskugarāwi, Kiera and Treaty 1, ando Kataswa de Muzohansi, Tintinarata, and Sumaya, audio ko na ganatan titinawala mo na ni text ng sa siguro ko no tayo sa uni nakako negos ng kwaso na tanong ni te titinawala mo na kastas sa bayar sinabi ko no radio te ko no tanong kitchener's tanong ko tatawanan na nagaya text ng sa tanong ko tatawanan na karuhya kan kwadi. So that's part of Kanien'kehá. Those are the words said before else in my language of Kanien'kehá. And we start off giving thanks to the Creator for living another day, being able to see each other and all of creation. We also thank Mother Earth for the food, the medicines, the waters that we drink, and for teaching us every day, if we ask. To response and to the natural life cycles for all that they help us with and keeping us healthy and strong and being able to I guess to live in a good way. So the words said before all else in the longhouse. It can take anywhere from 15 minutes to half an hour, if not longer. Because in the longhouse, we address each relations from the plants, the waters, the fish, everything that's in the earth to the sky. And we do it because when we do so, we bring into the conversation all those relatives that we're talking about, all the relations. And as well, it's really important to acknowledge all of those life givers who have helped us survive colonization. There are relatives that have helped us get us through the difficult times because we always had them. They were always there for us as they are today. And also like Sean suggested, because he's getting to know the Haudenosaunee culture and the ways and when we were discussing this book, we were talking about what's the best way, and Sean had suggested this, and I thought, well, it's perfect because this is what grounds me, and this is what gives me strength, and I'm sure it gave our ancestors strength to be able to recite that and to say we still have our medicines here, we're still here for us.
Thank you. I want to begin after those words. Can you both talk about how this book came about, your journeys, both of your journeys individually together? Sean, do you want to begin?
Sure. First, thanks to everyone for coming out tonight and giving Ellen a warm Winnipeg welcome. And thanks to everybody who helped put this on. In terms of how the book came about, the origins actually were that I was working with an activist magazine, Canadian Dimension, that looks at Indigenous issues quite a bit. And I had met Ellen earlier in Peterborough, where I was doing my PhD. And we went to dinner before a talk and got on well. And we were talking back and forth, and I was following a lot of what Ellen was doing in her community today to stop ongoing land theft. And I had reached out to her to say, we could do an interview talking about the land development that was going on in the community, and I think this was 2017. And we talked on the phone, we got along really well. People appreciated the opportunity to hear from Ellen directly. And we did another interview, I think, for this magazine.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you know, for me, I was learning so much in these conversations that I thought, I think I asked you at one point, have you ever thought about writing a book? And Ellen had said something that Audra Simpson talks about in the afterwards, which is, I had, but things always kept getting in the way. And the things that kept getting in the way are all of the amazing activism that Ellen does, the work that she does in her community to defend the land, to honor all relations. And so the idea was perhaps we could continue this relationship that we were building by talking on the phone and building that relationship up that way. And so that is really the origins of this book, is based in relationship building, dialogue, trying to help me understand more, but also to be able to give Ellen a platform so that other people can similarly learn from and be inspired by all the amazing things that she does, not just in 1990, but today. So that was the vision for what this book could become. I didn't think it would take 5 years for this to come out into the world, but I'm really glad that Ellen was patient and persistent to make sure that this book became a reality so that folks can learn from her for generations. I mean, this was one of the other things that I was saying to her, is that these interviews that we were doing for the magazine, they were appearing online, and then they could be hard to find afterwards. They have a very short shelf life, but books have a much longer shelf life. And so, future generations will be able to go to the library and be able to pick up this book and learn from Ellen. When we're gone, this book will still be there and people can learn from that. And I think for me, that was what I wanted to infuse the project with. And I'm very thankful that Ellen and I had the opportunity to do this.
Plus, he said when technology fails and there's a big sun flare, books will still be there.
In the apocalypse, Twinkies, cockroaches, and this book hopefully will still survive and help us figure out what we need to do to rebuild.
Absolutely. Ellen, do you have anything to add on that? Why was it the right time to do the book?
I think we were starting just as the Wet'suwet'en Shut Down Canada movement was going and picking up steam, and we figured there'd be a lot more to discuss on Shut Down Canada. But as we know, the pandemic hit, and so Sean and I continued our conversations by phone, and it just grew from there, from the different things that I've done. And I actually thought it was going to be more about the activism, and then it became something else totally, which is great. It was very fluid. It was very easy to work with Sean, and I mean, I still have the other book sitting in my computer somewhere. Maybe one day it'll be written, but I think for me it was a way to sort of because we're not anywhere close to reconciliation or decolonizing the way education is in the schools and the curriculum. So I figured this may be a small push to make that happen.
Talk about reconciliation. I'm just going to jump into that right now. You tell multiple stories around reconciliation, multiple times in the book. Reconciliation is very different than the love which you speak from. How, or is it even possible to reframe the dialogue of reconciliation to be something that would even come close to the dialogue that you're having yourself?
Well, I think it goes to the philosophy we have in Haudenosaunee culture, which is we're thinking about the faces not yet born, right? So we're planting seeds for them. So whatever we're doing today will affect those generations that are coming behind us. And if we're not going to be serious about reconciliation, we should at least be serious about caring for the future, caring for today's children, the beautiful baby in the back, and tomorrow's children. And if we're just going to allow the corporate monsters to continue to dictate to us what we need, what we want, then we have failed them. So for me, reconciliation goes beyond just the rhetoric that I hear from politicians. It goes to the point of seeing us as human beings and having respect for our rights. You can acknowledge we have rights. That doesn't mean you respect our rights. So for me, reconciliation is going beyond that recognition to a place of respect and to a place where we will make positive changes in a way that future generations will have an opportunity to survive this climate crisis, because it's going to get worse. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of what's to come. So for me, reconciliation is also reconciling with the land, with the earth, our mother, and all those relations that we talk about, on the Kanehsatà, that we say we're bringing in their voices in our discussions, in our decision making. That's reconciliation. What the government has been doing is not reconciliation. It's actually fighting to suppress us. It's still insisting that their version of history is the right version. And so reclaiming that narrative is also reconciliation. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to break out of that box because we haven't broken out of it yet. So reconciliation also has legal ramifications, which I think the government is not interested in. They're just going to placate the public and say, we're spending X amount of money on Indigenous peoples, when in fact, they're absorbing 64% of that budget, if not 67%. And, I don't know how people feel about reconciliation, but it's supposed to be about undoing the harms or the damages to a relationship. So if we're still seeing murdered and missing Indigenous people, if you're still taking our land, if we're still seeing children being put into the child welfare system, if we still see that we're not allowed to speak our languages, I come from Quebec, we call it known as Quebec. The French language is very dominant. There's no reconciliation. I mean, the Premier of Quebec says there's no systemic racism in Quebec, so there's no issue. We have no issues. So it's really about thinking beyond those words and what does that mean? That's what I want. Coming from a place of love, because that's really the only place to start from, not from hate.
Sean, you see this as a process of even reconciling yourself and coming to new truths, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the opportunity to learn from Ellen challenged, I think, a narrow vision of what reconciliation was in my mind. I mean, if you read from the beginning of the book, from the words that come before all else, it's really about challenging the very paradigm, right, that humans are above all other relations, and really thinking from a much more collective understanding. One of the other things that Ellen talks about in the book is that if the words before all else are not spoken before a meeting, that the decisions that are made in meetings can be invalidated because they are not actually taking into consideration the way that human actions are going to influence other relations. I mean, if we thought that way and made decisions like that now, we would not be doing what we are doing. And I think that is the kind of paradigm shift that a narrow vision of reconciliation misses, which is that non-Indigenous people have a lot to learn from the lived, grounded experience of Indigenous people who've lived here for thousands of years, whose cultures are grounded in survival here. And if we continue to have a very narrow vision of what reconciliation is, we lose out. I mean, part of this, the chapter on resurgence was sort of thinking about all of the life lessons of Ellen's life and putting it in the context of what was happening in northwestern British Columbia, where the government had implemented the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, and yet were deploying the RCMP to crack down on land offenders. So I mean, I think that in some ways we talked a lot about the limitations of reconciliation in a colonial framework, and thinking what would it take to actually change the way that we relate to one another and the world around us. That's what Ellen has been saying for 30 years. And we can learn a lot from someone who thinks in that way. and it's not just Ellen. The other thing that she talks about in the book constantly is that she decenters herself always. This is about understanding these much longer processes of Haudenosaunee philosophy that I think Audra Simpson's afterward rightly positions her as a philosopher, one of the great thinkers of our time. And I think learning from Ellen in this book, we can challenge that very narrow vision of what reconciliation is and actually think about more radical ways to change our relations to each other and the world around us. So I'm glad we have this book so that people can learn that, because I certainly learned a whole lot about, thinking about the world differently and what the future could be like if we were committed and understood that. So thank you.
It's a dreaming process.
It is a dream, yeah. Building a different world will require us to think about the world differently, and people like Ellen have a lot to teach us about what that could look like.
I think that one of the things that I loved about this book is it brings us from, I think, when most of us got to know the name Ellen Gabriel as a young person. I won't even say how old I was. We were all much younger, and those pictures are amazing because they remind us how much younger we were all at that time, and how, as a barely out of university, you had the weight of Canada and Quebec put on you, but that had always been there. But what's amazing is that the book walks you from that first April all the way through to 5 years ago, even since then. Multiple journeys in your life, all coming back to those words that come before homelands. What are some of the things in the book that you were so happy to see get on a page that you think that Canadians, particularly settler society, should know more about you, should know more about a journey, and where they should be going? Are there any stories that resonate, or why did you tell them that you're so happy to have those out, so that the image of Ellen Gabriel at the blockade isn't what people know? There's so much more.
It's a good question. And I've told this to Sean numerous times, and I think you as well. I am not the subject. I am not the issue. I'm just a messenger. And I've had a lot of good, precious teachers in my life, both of you being amongst them. And it's to take that knowledge and to be able to, I guess, in listening to the elders who taught me, it's taking that interpretation and trying to be as true as possible to those teachings. So my experience as a land defender, activist, whatever you want to call me, has been very challenging. To be a woman, an Indigenous woman in a man's world, in a very much a patriarchal culture, is a challenge, because you know, before people even meet me, especially those who remember 1990, we were called terrorists. We were called criminals. Excuse me. And that sort of labeling never leaves you. As much as you try not to carry it with you, it really never leaves you. And it's not to say that I agree. It's just that it's something that is in the back of my mind, when people think about me. But we are who we are because of who raised us, right? We were talking about Sean, talking about his grandmother. It was very precious in his life, and I think about all the you know, my aunties and my grandmother and my parents teaching me how to be a person, how a human being, to care, to respect, you know, and having the language, hearing the language in as I was growing up, but not being taught it in school. Those things help shape you. And I guess 1990 sort of pushed me in that direction of being more brave and having more courage. Because it wasn't just me, it was a whole community, it was Kanehsatà. So I can't really take credit for anything other than just being the messenger. And what I want people to know is that Indigenous people have always wanted peace. We have always tried to have some sort of reconciliation, if that's even the right word. But to have a peaceful relationship with each other, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, yellow, Indigenous. We have all been affected by settler colonialism. And this whole country is founded on genocide. But we're not allowed to speak it. But if someone else speaks it, then yeah, okay, that's what happened, right? So it's that challenge of having being taken seriously. I think that's, and just like, you know, the spirit of a Mohawk person, to be stubborn and saying F you to the government all the time, because this is what we're constantly put in a position of, right? And it's like, it's nice to have a reputation of being a bad ass. I'm trying to look see if there's any kids around here. But besides the little one, who's hopefully she won't, that's not the first word she's gonna say. Because, you know, there's so many kind, funny Mohawk people, very loyal and very like, but they're very hurt as well. And so it's going to take time for us to heal. Maybe not my generation, but hopefully, you know, that little baby generation, people feel like, you know, my life is just as valuable as yours. And we talk about, you know, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter. But everybody's trying to feel distinct, I guess. And we are distinct by our stories. And that's the only thing for me that, I guess, to be taken from this book. And that I'm an artist. I mean, that's what I went to school for, is to be an artist. And that's what documentaries has given me a new tool in my artist vocabulary.
I want to get to that next. Sean, is there anything that came out of this book, story, a dimension of activism, of being a land defender, of where things need to go that you haven't thought about?
Yeah, maybe to connect a couple of things here. Tomorrow night, Ellen's going to be screening her film at the Reframing Art Gallery, which is really talking about the role of Mohawk women in 1990. And that was one of the things that I had learned. I remember I told Ellen very early on, I was teaching a class on the Mohawk resistance, and I was saying, oh, well, I teach Ellen Bombswood's film. And she stopped me and she said, it's a good film, but there's, you know, a lot of things that it leaves out, that it focuses on the role of men. The masked warriors with AKs got a lot of media attention, which distracted from the fact that this started, right, with Mohawk women being connected to their teachings about standing up for the land and being stewards of the land. And, you know, the men were invited afterwards, but then took all of the attention in media. And the role of Mohawk women and all of the teachings about this got lost. And I think as someone, you know, raised by women, that was a thing that I thought was very important to have corrected. Because the other thing is that in teaching a course about 1990, a lot of men have books. Katsi'tsakwas has a book, Tom Sidden has a book, Harry Swain, who's a journalist at the time, has a book, but someone like Ellen Gabriel does not. And I think in learning about that, I had hoped that this relationship would allow that part of the story to be corrected. And that when we think about ongoing land defense today, that the way in which the story gets manipulated, as Ellen was saying, that land defenders are criminals or terrorists, when they're really standing up for the land that we all collectively depend on for our survival. That needs to change. We need to think about that differently. So that is a teaching that I hope is very early on in the book that people can really connect to, that changes your way of understanding 1990 and how most people get to know Ellen, and that the rest of the book can be this cool journey to figure out that, you know, she's done a lot more than that. And we can talk about some of that.
Love to hear more about where your art is going, where it's been, because people haven't read the book yet, or I'm assuming most haven't read the book yet. You just graduated out of with your art degree. You're a young artist. This took you away from your art. Has art helped you heal? And where do you go with your art? Is it about land as well? And those histories and those stories, is there a connection between Ellen the land defender and Ellen the artist? So much better.
Absolutely. I think art, you know, the moment I could pick up a pencil and I understood how it functions, I've been drawing, and my parents encouraged me. And they're really proud of me. They made sure that I knew that, and it was so that encouraged me to be an artist, to continue my art. But you know, when you graduate high school, you gotta get a job. And an artist is not a job you're gonna make money on. So my parents wanted me to go into nursing or something like that. And back then, women of my generation, you became a secretary or a nurse or a waitress, right? And I didn't want to be a secretary. I did want to help people, so I tried nursing for a while and didn't finish. But my art was always there. And after the resistance in 1990, I had a really hard time to think clearly. I couldn't paint, and I was invited to these shows, and it's like, okay, so it's kind of like a writer's block in a sense. And so the painting I did, which had on the cover of Canadian magazine, Canadian Dimensions, that came from that struggle, the torment of it. But since that time, I do a lot of landscapes, portraits. I've done some illustrations for my documentaries. And I continue to paint and to do illustrations, just not for show, just for me. But my paintings, I have a really small house, so I don't have a studio. So I paint on boards. I don't know if anybody knows what boards are. So they can be really small or they can be really big. And so I've been using a wood burning tool. And what I've been doing is different legends, Haudenosaunee legends on them. Because I'm very proud of my roots, and I'm very proud of the teachings my parents gave me. I'd like to just do abstract one day, just have a 6-foot canvas and just throw paint at it and see what happens.
You should, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, art has really helped me in the crazy times that we're living in, but also the crazy life that I have.
One of the ways that I've got to know you is as an activist through your involvement with MMIWG, through Quebec Native Women's Association, through MMIWG. We're at the 20th anniversary of Sisters in Spirit. I think that was the second event that we were both supposed to in 2 days. Those moments are so large in this city and are so large in the work that you've done. Does that define part of the reason why you got involved with MMIWG? Has there been movement? And how do we link those words and the teachings and that love into movement for MMIWG? There's a lot there that are in the book, that are in stories that we've told and talked about over the years.
Well, Quebec Native Women is part of Native Women's Association of Canada, so that's the only reason I was involved in that. But I became friends with Beth Jacobs, who was one of the writers of the first Stolen Sisters report from Amnesty International with Craig Benjamin. And I was there when they launched it, and I was there when I heard some of our people, I won't name their gender, who didn't think it was important, an important issue. And said, you know, we're not going to cherry pick our issues. And it's just a woman thing. I'm not sure if it's a man thing too. But when you say something like that, it makes you want to push it even harder, right? But the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women has made strides since 2004. However, the fact that it's still going on means that it's not being properly addressed by any government, and the fact that, you know, we have people who are self-medicating because they went to Indian residential school, or they're multi-generational survivor, and we haven't had the time to be able to heal from that. So I think that when we think about our murdered and missing sisters and brothers as well, we also have to keep in mind that colonization is still going on. It's not a thing of the past. It's still going on. They're still taking that, and that there is that desire for the Canadian government, perhaps not Canadian society, but the elites in Canada, who would like to see us erased. So, you know, it takes people like the people who are here and the folks who have supported murdered and missing Indigenous women rallies and demos and petitions, because the government definitely doesn't listen. So as far as government is concerned, you know, they're doing it grudgingly, just like the Indian residential school. It's grudging that we have to do it because it's been exposed, right? So we need to expose it more to put more pressure on. Search the landfill. I mean, that's the most recent one, right? Because we have serial killers who specifically target. We look at Human Rights Watch. The RCMP are involved. Lawyers and judges are involved in this issue. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of resistance from the inside of policy changers and makers. So we as the people need to push. And so I mean, it's not a very big chapter in the book, because I don't want to speak on behalf of the families who are affected, and that's a really important thing for the families to take the lead. But it scares me that it's not being taken seriously by government, or any level of government, and especially the police. And that, you know, those of you who have daughters or young sons, you know, we need to change in how they learn and how to take care of themselves. Because when we were talking about being young, it's like, you know, when you're young, you just want to party, you want to have a job so you can party somewhere, right? You can pay for your expenses. So we're living in a society where there's nothing, there's no security for anybody. And murdered and missing Indigenous women is a serious issue that should not be happening still. In Canada, 20 years later, there's no real advocate within government other than the exam, my hero, who is trying to push this issue in Parliament. And that's the kind of people you got to elect. You know, don't just vote because it's your party of choice. Vote because the person is going to be a good person to represent you well.
I like those words, represent you all. It's an amazing words to end on, because it is really going back to those words you began with. There are two legal systems, there are two political systems, and those are all the way through the book. That comes out from time to time, walking through this and walking through stories. Was that something that you meant to do, Sean, and asking questions and then generating dialogue? What was the book that you were trying to, and some of the stories that you were trying to pull out?
Well, I mean, part of the book, or part of our conversation, was also trying to break Ellen free of 1990. Because that, of course, is an important part of her life and her story, but it's only part of the book. The things that we've been talking about more recently, her work as an artist, her work as the president of Quebec Native Women, the work that she does on the international stage as a representative at the United Nations for Indigenous people and for everyone. All of these, I think, were important pieces to bring out, but they happened organically. Like, I would call Ellen, you know, we're going to talk about this, but then sometimes we go in a totally different direction. And I think part of that was trying actually to build in. Ellen very early on talked a lot about the symbolism of the two-row wampum and nation-to-nation relations as we were talking about what's Odin and the breakdown of that. And I think maybe unintentionally, one of the things that I feel good about in this book is a sort of modeling of what that dialogue can look like. And inviting people into having that dialogue and being able to learn from sort of a more respectful relationship building and learning through that piece and understanding that someone like Ellen is multifaceted. There's a lot to Ellen's life and to the things that are important to her now. If we had continued this book and included other conversations, we would be talking about Palestine, we would be talking about things that we are talking about in the car on the way over. Because we need people like Ellen who can help us connect the dots between so many of these different things. And part of what I had hoped in this book is really to give people the opportunity to sit down like I had, to be able to learn from and be inspired by Ellen. To do that.
I think you've done that. Do people have questions? Open it up. Are there any questions? Yeah.
I'm just kind of interested in the idea of words, and you have your own language, of course, and you learned English, and I'm just wondering, how does your view of earth and the land and the waters, how is that affected by your own language, and how is it different from using English words to describe or to embrace the ideas that you're trying to convey?
Well, my Kanien'kehá is like 80% words. They're really long words. I think it gives you a sense of the spiritual connections that we have to the land and to each other. There is an expression for when you're grieving that your mind has fallen on the ground. And so it puts your spirit into the situation. And so when I say what it's more than just thank you. There's a lot of reverence in it when you say that, and then you say what I welcome you. You know, there's almost like an embrace implied in it. When we say thank you, it's just saying no, it's just pretty much thank you. But I don't know, it's really hard to say how it influenced me, other than the fact that, you know, I'm a farm girl, I grew up in the country with horses. my parents went to day school and experienced a lot of racism. And so there you know, when you were talking about those kinds of issues, it seems more severe. So it's easy to take something that you've heard in English to think it's more severe than it is. So we feel hurt a little bit more than when we're hearing the colonial languages. But I think in our relationship with each other, like we say, it's the Kahnawà, our elder brother, the sun. Kahnawà, our grandmother, the moon, she's the night sun. Right? And Mother Earth. So it's always implying that relationship that we have with each other. Because it's about relationships. It's about that sharing and exchanging of energy. And it's a wonderful language. I was telling Sean, it's like movies going in your head when you're listening to someone talk, because it's all, like I said, it's action oriented, right? So for me, it's one of the most precious gifts that our ancestors gave us. I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's the best I can do.
Question for Sean. What is a white settler guy doing, being so passionate for years? Like, where did it start involving Indigenous issues, or Canadian issues, but given your age, how did it start?
I'm saying, talking to Ellen while we were having dinner, Ellen loved this question. You know, in some ways, as Kiera's saying, the book starts off with challenging the way that the reader sees the world and thinking about it from a Haudenosaunee perspective. And the hope is that when you see that, then you understand why someone like Ellen would do what she did in 1990 and today. And I had an opportunity in university to learn about where I'm from, out in Vancouver in British Columbia, from a totally different perspective, and cut through all of those colonial lies and mythologies to see the world that I lived in differently. And thought if more people had an opportunity to learn that way, we would live in a different world. We would see the world differently, we would relate to one another differently. So I wanted to give other people an opportunity to invite them in to learn about that, but in a way that also wasn't about me. That was also about trying to facilitate people like me learning from people like Ellen. That, I think, is the way that this relationship of building stronger relationships really needs to work. I hope this book is part of modeling what that can look like.
We have a question from online. Shelton asks, throughout your journey, at what levels have you seen work done to support what you advocate for? Any government, community-led organizations? And if not, what could they do, in your opinion, to start?
If I just speak from a community perspective, they've done nothing. We live in a lawless community that's been overrun by organized crime, who are exploiting the fact that the Katsi'tsakwas, the provincial police, do not want another siege or crisis. They don't want to look bad. I have lobbied for many years every single Minister of Indian Affairs. And I remember speaking to Carolyn Bennett one time in Gatineau. And she says, well, if you don't like it, take us to court. I remember telling Mark Miller about what's happening in the community. He says, well, we can't help you. Even though they've had a hand in creating the mess. So, yeah. As far as the community is concerned, we've lost more land and we are in worse conditions than we were under the siege. As far as Indigenous issues across Canada are concerned, that's a little bit different. I think Indigenous people's issues have come to the forefront, not exactly in a perfect way, but we have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that got a boost in 1990 because it tarnished the reputation of Canada. We were able to make recommendations so that the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples came through, and this is when the Indian residential school issues were exposed. We've got the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all from that, from 1990, because we had recommended it. I think we have a long way to go before we say there's reconciliation and that things are working out, but if you think about, the report that Yellowhead did on injunctions that Indigenous peoples have against corporations who are trying to take our land, that we lose, 99% of the time? I'd say that, and look at I think it's 5 major Supreme Court decisions that have been made in favor of Indigenous peoples, and they're not being implemented. So we have a lot of nice stuff on paper, but we don't have anything in actual practice to implement. So yeah, we're further ahead than we were 34 years ago, but we've got a lot of work to do, and we shouldn't start patting ourselves on the back just yet. So.
Ends off exactly where I wanted to ask. And that's talk continuously through the book about 2 legal traditions, 2 philosophies, about how Canada always puts up this rule of law. And of course it's their law and they can stand behind it. Even if the Supreme Court rules yet again this past week. No, that was a BC Supreme Court, sorry. But what's Ollerton won at the Supreme Court? Got them nothing. Just stand behind their law, do whatever. We have this continuing to go on. We have media still looking only at those men and really obfuscating what's happening in community often, but looking at what the men are doing and not what women are doing, or women standing up. Not looking at the land, not looking at these 2 legal traditions. Where do we go next? What are you doing next?
What am I doing next, or where are we going next? I think we all need to take this nice journey of sitting in uncomfortable conversations where we can share a meal and talk to each other and say, this is my reality, this is my history, this is what's going on, because our history is not the same as settlers. And to really talk about land back, to be serious about land back, not just a trope, right? And to say, let's put a moratorium on all development across Canada. But I know that won't happen. Because if you think about the times that we're living in the climate crisis, land is being, prime agricultural land is being gobbled up for condos and urban sprawl. So it's not just pipelines for me, as far as I'm concerned, that are the issue. Where we need to go is to have our laws for each territory, right? Treaty 1 has different ones, we have different ones. Women are title holders to the land. So the women get a say in what's going on, but to incorporate those into the relationship and in the legal traditions. Because it's not enough to recommend that judges, lawyers, teachers, nurses, doctors learn about Canada's genocidal history. You can learn about it, what are you gonna do about it? And I guess that's the question really should be on Canadians. What are you gonna do about it? Because reconciliation should not be on our shoulder, it's all on your shoulder. What are you going to do about it? So I can't answer that question. I just know that I'm gonna continue to do my work. Maybe I should just serve and an artist and documentarian and continue the work that I'm supposed to be doing under the Great Hall.
Thank you for sharing your work thus far and your journey thus far. Thank you for getting Ellen to share that journey so that others can learn. It's been an honor to share the last 15, 16 years of your journey with you. And I'm hoping that we get to take different journeys and that others start picking up their work and doing what Canada needs to do. So I echo that. Because there's so many other things that you could be doing, like painting.
Yeah, that's, I always keep thinking, one day I'm gonna be able to sit down and just paint, wake up every day, just paint, do something, and it never happens. So as I get on in years, I find I wanna take more time to do that. I wanna thank you for your insightful questions. I wanna thank Kanehsatà Robinson for hosting us. And I wanna thank Sean for his patience, his understanding, and his friendship throughout these years. It's been a special journey to be with you on this. So thank you everyone as well for coming out, taking the time from your days. I'm sure you've been working and here you are coming to sit and listen to people talk. So thank you. I love being in a bookstore, by the way. There's one question.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me the time to make a comment. I just arrived in Winnipeg today to celebrate tomorrow my sister's 93rd birthday. And my niece invited me to come with her this evening. So what you've been saying tonight, I have found a lot of it quite disturbing, because coming at it from the perspective of what's going on in British Columbia, I feel that the advances out there for Indigenous promotion of moving ahead seems to be that it's just moving ahead. Now the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations have joined together to develop lands, which was their original lands, their only lands, their native lands, their lands, period. One is a huge development right next to the Broad Street Bridge, and it's just massive, massive towers there, but they're going to be filled with people. The other big project is going to be the Jericho lands, and that's going to have about 26,000 people by the time that it is done. Now, what can people do? My first memory of Indigenous people goes so far back because I'm from Banff. I remember Banff Indian days very clearly, and that is where I fell in love with Indigenous people, Indigenous culture. And all throughout my entire life, Indigenous people have come in and have come out, and have come in and come out. And sometimes it just baffles me how this happens. It turns out that my realtor is part Indigenous. Her mother is Gitxsan. I could go on with references like that. My plumber in January opened up the door and there's this Indigenous man there to come and look after my plumbing. What have I done, and what I encourage people to do is to really educate yourself. Late in life, when I was 41, I went to law school. And I ended up doing criminal defense, and many, probably 95% of my clients were Indigenous. And I just loved it. It was just so rewarding. And my husband, who I put through law school as well, we talked about what can we do? We could see the problems and what could we do? And we talked about, would we have enough money to do bursaries? That was our goal. And of course, Vancouver and their horrible cost of housing. When my husband passed away, 5 years later, I sold my house. I got a windfall on my house and I was like, right, now I can do it. And because I was a graduate of UBC Law School, I set up an endowment fund. And it isn't about me. It is about those 10-year-old boys and girls who someday want to go to law school, that someday, when I, God, hope not too soon, will be there for them to be able to tap into those resources. So we can all do something. We can think about what we can do to advance, that's not the correct word, but to put a voice out there for what you can do, and you have to just educate yourself. And just recently, I was at a barbecue at the law school, and I said to the dean, how many Indigenous students do you have this year? The year before, when I asked that, I embarrassed him because he didn't know. This year, I asked him again just a couple of weeks ago, and there were 15. And I thought, good, but I want to hear 40 next time. I want to hear 60 next time. I don't want to hear.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your time and your attention. We will now be moving along to the signing portion of this evening. So in just a moment, situate Ellen and Sean behind this table. Please do feel free to have a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Just please do remember to pay for the book. We're so incredibly grateful that you are all here to spend this evening with us, and so very grateful to all of our partners for helping to pull together this evening and make it a possibility. The Department of Indigenous Studies, the University of Manitoba, the Department for Human Rights Research, Center for Human Rights Research, and of course, Between the Lines for publishing this book in the first place. It's been such an honor to share this evening with Ellen Gabriel, Sean Carleton, Kiera Ladner. Please give them all a very warm round of applause.